What's up everyone, Ryan from Oakland Ghost, and today I wanted to check out and talk about an very affordable polyphonic fully analog synth, and that would be the Behringer JT Mini. Now, before we get into that, before I unbox it and we check it out and see what it sounds like, let's just address the elephant in the room. That elephant, of course, being Behringer, because I don't want to get eviscerated in the comments, and I haven't really talked about what I think about Behringer. And that's mostly because I don't own anything by Behringer, except my patch bay, which is a patch bay. I'd say in general, I don't love that they recreate or clone current market synths. I think that's kind of a shady practice, especially things like the Grandmother or the Moog Sound Studio clones that they've done. That's kind of crappy. Like, let me copy your thing and cut the price. I don't know, that feels a little shady to me personally. On the other hand, the idea of bringing back synths that are almost impossible to find or very rare or very expensive, like old synths, to me that's kind of like a video game emulation, It's like, well, Nintendo's not making old Nintendo cartridges and I want to play that game. So I don't know, that way I kind of feel a little less weird about it. I feel like you're introducing new people to synths that they'd otherwise never have access to. And I think that's pretty cool. Regardless of where you stand on this, they're just affordable. If that's introducing people to this hobby, if it's getting people into synths and into gear, I guess that's pretty cool too. If you can get in there at a price that you can afford, it's hard to see a lot of things wrong with that. I guess at the end of the day, the way I feel about it is I wish that they'd spend more time developing their own synths. By all accounts, Behringer in general sounds pretty good most of the time when they're cloning or emulating these other synths. So I guess I wish they'd spend more time just developing their own thing and continuing to offer those at an affordable price. I personally prefer to spend my money on companies like, Dreadbox or Synthstrom that are developing and pushing gear in new ways, smaller companies that are just doing cool new stuff. I feel like that's a better investment on my part. Those are the people that I'd like to invest in. As far as this guy's concerned, technically I didn't buy it. I get a gift card from the company I work for every year, and if it's between a fully analog synth and a pair of socks, of course I'm going to take the analog synth, right? There's the Behringer debate as far as I want to deal with it. I probably wouldn't buy things from them normally myself, but when it's free and hopefully it sounds good, I'm a little more willing to do that. And plus, the JT Mini, it's $100. It's fully analog, which of course, if you've watched anything by me, I like, and it's polyphonic. Can you find a polyphonic analog synth for $100 anywhere else? I don't think so. I don't think you can. Not that I can think of. And it's a clone of the Jupiter 8, which is an amazing sounding synth. There you have it. Let's jump in. Let's unbox it. Let's see what you get in the box, and let's plug this thing in and see what it's all about. All right, so again, one of the reasons I'm making a video about this, it's a pretty new synth. It came out like in December, but they've been kind of hard to get a hold of. This is kind of the first batch that has been mass produced and you can actually find it now. I just kind of wanted to check it out and see what it's all about. Let's see what you get in the box. I haven't seen a lot of great videos showing you what this synth's all about, what it sounds like. So I thought I might as well make one and you guys could judge for yourself whether it's worth the investment. Here's the box. Let's see what we get in there. Well, at least we know where it's made, right? It's all in Chinese, so I don't know what that's all about, but it says it passed, so I guess that's cool. Well, now this is actually kind of rare. There's actually a written instruction menu. These are getting harder and harder to find with most synths, so I do appreciate that. It looks like there's also a QR code that you can scan to probably get through it a little further. And then let's see what we got. And then, man, that's it. Yeah, it's literally just the synth. That's all there is. It's a little bit bigger actually than I thought. Let me open this bad boy up real quick. See what we got. All right, so yeah, it's a decent size. I'd say it's probably, you can see my hand. I guess that's about Volca size, would you say? I don't have any of the Volcas, but this looks to me about the size of Korg's Volca kind of series. It does have a full 5-pin MIDI DIN, which I actually really appreciate. I prefer that to the TRS stuff that everyone else is going to do. Now, it didn't even come with a power supply. Looks like it's USB powered. USB-C is what it looks like to me. We'll take a look at it and we'll run through how the synth works. I haven't read the instructions yet, and I'm not gonna, because I like doing these first impression videos because I think a lot of people skip the instructions, for one, but for two, I know my way around a synth, and so if it's well made, then I should be able to figure out most of what it can do by just diving in and playing with it. So that's what we're gonna do. Let me get it plugged in and we'll get right to it. All right, let's turn this puppy on. So weird. So one thing I've noticed is oftentimes I need to unplug this, plug it back in order for it to turn on. That's kind of dumb. But that's pretty. I like that. Look at that startup sequence. Not bad. All right. So we have here the Behringer JT Mini. For those of you that don't know, the JT Mini is based on the very famous Roland Jupiter 8. It's a fully analog synth, which is kind of crazy that they made it this small. They say polyphonic, it's not polyphonic, it's paraphonic because it only uses the same filter in the same envelope. But regardless, what that means is you can play up to 3 voices at once. So you could potentially play, you know, a simple chord or something like that, which is plenty for most things, I would think. But yeah, the paraphonic thing just means the envelope and the filter have to retrigger every time you hit a new note. So that actually gives you some interesting characteristics occasionally as well. It's a very simple synth. It's the second in their mini line. I think the other one is the VS, which is the vector synth, and that one's kind of a hybrid synth. That one's actually probably got a lot more going on with it. Obviously it's digital, it's not analog. You know, you're going to get presets, you're going to get that kind of stuff. This doesn't really have presets, although you can write sequences and you could save a motion sequence, which is like you could, you could write the filter and stuff like that across your sequence and you can save that. That's kind of fun. It does have a sequencer. I don't think I would use the sequencer myself because, I mean, honestly, I don't even think I'll use these touchpads, which is the next thing I was going to mention. It has a 23 key touchpad, so you can actually play it, which is fine for the purposes of this demo, but obviously I would be using a real keyboard or my Deluge or something to sequence this in most cases. But this is probably fine for just dialing up sounds. Otherwise, yeah, it's a very straightforward analog synthesizer. Basically, like with all subtractive synths, it's got VCO, which is your voltage controlled oscillator. Has a couple different shapes. We have triangle, we have saw, we have pulse, and we have square. And pulse allows for pulse width modulation. I'm not positive if you can modulate that, like with the LFO or the envelope or something like that. It might be possible, but I'm not sure how or if. And then it also has a filter that is either a 2-pole or 4-pole filter. I'll show you how to switch between those. I think I know how to do it. And then last, it has an envelope, which is what shapes, you know, the sound coming out of the oscillator and out to the amp. It's a full ADSR, so attack, decay, sustain, release. That's pretty much it. Let's see what it sounds like. So I'm just gonna give it a little decay, a little sustain, maybe a little more release. And there we go. What are we on right now? Let's start with a triangle. And then over here, this is like your different octaves. Let's hang out there. The first thing I always do, I always usually just have the cutoff opened, all the way open. So the filter's all the way open and no resonance, just so we can hear what the actual tone of everything, the pure tone kind of sounds like before we start subtracting things away from it. The last thing I didn't mention, it does have an LFO, which you can use to then modulate, you know, things like the envelope or the pitch, things like that. The detune we'll get into when we check out some of the other modes. But let's start with the envelope. We have attack, decay, sustain, release. So attack, of course, is how quick it responds when you touch. So that's with no attack. It's just starting as soon as we hit. If you go all the way up, kind of swells in, right? And then the decay is after the attack, after it reaches the attack's peak. The decay is how quick it comes down to hit your sustain level, and that's basically like the volume that it's at when you hold the key. So as you can hear, so you can have no sustain. So if you took that off, now it's only responding between these three. That's how you can get some really plucky sounds, and that's actually really good for like arpeggios and stuff like that, is not worrying about sustain, because then you completely control what the sound shape sounds like just on the envelope. But when we're just sampling and playing it, it's probably a good idea to have some sustain. And then last, of course, is the release, and that's how quick the sound fades out at the end. So here's obviously like no release. Yeah, see, my big fat fingers already don't like this keyboard. And then, you know, you can have a really long one. And it's pretty long. Yeah, it's pretty long. So you could probably use this to do some pretty cool pads and stuff like that, because that's a super long release. That's cool. And again, this is a purely analog synth, so you're not having presets, there's not a lot of stuff. The way you shape your sound is either by changing the waveform, and then you start subtracting things like the filter and adding resonance and things like that. One last thing before we start exploring that is the couple different modes that we have here. The first, of course, is that I'm playing right now is what they call poly mode, or, you know, polyphonic. Again, it's really paraphonic because there's not a filter and an envelope per voice. It's just one that all shares. But you get up to 3 that you could push together. So let's see if we could do that. So you can hear what I mean by it's sharing an envelope and it's sharing a filter by how it re-triggers every time I add a key, right? Hear how you can hear it trigger. But, you know, if you had a keyboard, it'd be a lot easier to just hit a chord. You could even ease up on that. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty rad. I mean, again, getting a paraphonic, fully analog synth for $100 and one that's modeled after the Jupiter 8, that's pretty crazy. And even though it wasn't my money that I used to buy this, I used my company's money because they gave me that gift card. Even if I had spent $100 on this, I probably wouldn't feel that bad because, I mean, that's pretty sick. Let's check out some of the other waveforms. So yeah, this is, again, I have the filter all the way open right now. We'll check out the filter in just a sec. Yeah, this is triangle. Let's see, this is sawtooth. And that's usually a good one to test filters. Nice. And then we have pulse, and this is the one that we could use a pulse with modulation on. And what that is it just kind of, you can see by the little graphic in there, if you look really close, it basically changes how wide one side of the pulse is, and that changes the harmonic quality. So like if I just hold a note here, you can hear how it kind of sweeps. Side note, it's really cool how these like light up when you're using them. So that's pulse width, and then we have just straight square, and usually these are combined, but this one, basically what that means is now you can't use the pulse width modulation, it just stays a square. So it doesn't matter what I do with that. Sounds like pitch mod uses the envelope to change things, but I'm not sure about that. We'll get into that in a minute. So those are the different wave shapes you have. And then I'm going to switch to saw really quick just so we can kind of take a listen to what the filter actually sounds like, because I'm not sure yet. So again, this is with the filter all the way open. The first thing I'm going to do, why don't we start, usually around halfway is a good starting point for most filters to get a sense of what they sound like. And let's just turn it off. But we can do a sweep. That's a pretty good sounding filter, I gotta be honest. So that's at halfway. That sounds pretty killer. See, again, my fat fingers, if you hit a middle, it just automatically switches. Let's add a little more resonance and see. Let's go like, I don't know, 3/4. So it's already starting to kind of self-oscillate a little bit. It's getting a little squelchy past half, I think. Let's go all the way. It adds some interesting something, I guess, when you go up there. Generally, I don't like that really high pitch. But when you kind of shave some sound off, that sounds kind of cool. Interesting. All right, so yeah, I mean, generally, I think I usually stick somewhere around half or a little past half, and that's how you get those classic, you know, the filter sweeps you're used to hearing from analog. That kind of action, right? Now, of course, you can automate that by using either the LFO or the envelope, by using these attenuators here. And the attenuators, that's just how much it's going to turn that knob for you based on either your LFO or your envelope. So if we wanted to hear what that sounds like, let's just add some of the envelope there. So now this is like with the full thing. So every time I hit a key, it's doing the same thing as if I was hitting the note, but it's also opening the filter the same amount. And that's, you know, classic synth business. And you just find your... I can't play this thing for snot. It is cool that it's here to be able to audition sounds, I guess. But anyway, so there's if you're using the filter to do this. I mean, you can think of either the envelope or the LFO as basically like a secret hand that turns that knob for you in this section here. So let's try the LFO. So we got to give it a rate. So the LFO, this is the rate of the LFO. When you're turning it, it lets you know that it's doing something. So right now it's doing nothing. And now if we add a little bit of this, it should start turning that. And if we go slower. So again, this is how much it's going to turn that knob for you based on the LFO. And the LFO does have a couple different patterns. It looks like it has sine, saw, square, and random. Let's try run. And the way you get to these different keys is you hold function, and you go like that. So let's see what a random LFO sounds like. It's kind of like a sample and hold. So it's just sending a random pulse to turn it on there. We also have a saw. So it's more like this instead of like a sine, which is what it's doing before, right? It's going up and then dropping. And again, that's how much. This is a good way to get a little bit of like rhythm almost to some of your beats sometimes, especially if you use something like a square. And the cool thing is with the motion sequencer, I believe you could actually do something like this. Like you could you could record that into your sequence, and then it'll just automate it. Basically, it'll remember that and play it the same way every time. But I don't know about the motion sequencer. That's something I'll have to investigate later. That's a little more advanced, I suppose. So yeah, those are the different ones. Oh, one more thing. So the filter is either a 2-pole or 4-pole. I don't know what the difference is, but I know I know what the difference between those filters are. For real, I just don't know which one's which. Right now, it's this filter. But if you want to change it to the other, you go like that. You hit the slope. And that's the other one. And to me, that one, let's try them side by side. This one feels beefier. So those are your two filters. And then the last thing with the LFO that I wanted to show real quick, let's do it again with the filter. Let's say we like... All right, so say that's our sound. One thing that this has that I don't have on any of my other analog synths that I actually think is kind of cool is this delay time. And what that does is it delays when that LFO kicks in by a certain amount of time, depending on how much you twist this. So right now it kicks in right away, right? As soon as we hit it, the LFO's turning that knob for us. But if we hit delay, let's do it a little later so you can see. That's kind of cool. So it just kicks in a little bit later after you press the keys, which is a cool way to add a little bit of effect to some of your stuff. That's the basic of synthesis, right? So it's the basic thing that you can do with this guy, and that's the basic of subtractive synths. Really, I mean, I just gave you a whole overview, not only of how this synth works, but of how most synths work in general. So the last thing that this thing that does different, that are other features that it has that we haven't really covered yet, is over on this side. So we've already seen the poly, and that just means which means, of course, we can play more than one note at once, and we could even do chords, right? That's what poly means. The other mode that it has is called Unison. And what Unison means is instead of being able to play more than one note at the same time, it plays all three voices on one voice. So it just thickens up the sound. So here, let's take a listen. Let's go full. Sometimes this is good with a square. I'm going to open up the filter. So here's what it sounds like without. That's just one voice, right? Here is all three voices. This is Unison mode. Again. So it just thickens it up and beefs it up. And another way that you make this sound even better, because all of the voices are tied to one oscillator, they're all sharing the same pitch. And one of the cool things that we tend to associate with analog synths is things go in and out of tune a little bit, just a little bit. It's always not a lot, but it's enough that it makes waveforms rub against each other in interesting ways. And that's kind of what I think kind of creates that warmth that most people associate with analog synths and what I like about them. And what you can do here is when you're using the three voices all at once, we have a detune knob here. And so I'll sample it for you. So here's all three playing the same. See how they're starting to go out of phase a little bit? It goes really out of phase the more you go out, but... So that's just, everything's in the same tune right there. But as soon as you break it a little, you almost get that movement in the sound. So detune is your friend. And that's actually good on poly mode too, because it'll make all the voices for each different note you're hitting just a little bit out as well. It doesn't need a lot most of the time, as you can see. I mean, it just sounds a little bit better and a little bit thicker when you add this. And I'm going to remind you guys, this is all completely dry. I'm not using any effects. This is straight out of the box. It already sounds pretty cool, I think. So the last thing we got here is we have tempo. And you need this for the next part. It has an arpeggiator that has a couple different modes. Let's go up an octave for fun. So that's going up. So that's fun. And then it has a down. And then it has an up and down. So it goes up the octave range, down the octave range for the arpeggiator, right? And then last, it has a random arpeggiator. Which is pretty dope. I'm gonna just play with it for a second. Pretty cool. So yeah, I mean, that's useful. I personally, I don't think that I'll ever use that. I might, you never know, but I think in general, I'll probably be hanging out in poly or unison mode, depending on what kind of sound I'm trying to make. The reason I wouldn't use the arpeggiator myself is because I have other synths that make the arpeggiators and they're just better. The same reason I wouldn't be using this keyboard. I'd be sequencing this almost for sure with my Deluge or with a keyboard, and the arpeggiator functions on the Deluge are just better, and I have more control over them. Luckily, I can send that to MIDI. And what I do like about this that I'll say too, even though this is cheap, and when I say cheap, I just mean price-wise, it feels pretty sturdy, I'm not gonna lie. But what I do like is that it has a 5-pin MIDI DIN instead of a TRS or worse, a USB, although you can use this as USB MIDI too, as far as I understand. So I love that it has the MIDI in, that's great. It's gonna make it a lot easier to control. It also has analog sync in and sync out for tempo, if you want to do that with other modular gear, or if you just want to use this as your clock for other gear, that's cool too. The last thing that I'll say that I want to knock it a little bit, and this isn't a Behringer specific thing, this is just in general, I really hate USB power. I understand why they do it. It's how they keep costs down. It's how they keep things cheap, because they can, for one, it's just a part that everybody, it's very easy to come by that part, and they can count on just about everyone having a USB cable because they've become ubiquitous with everything we do. So they don't have to give you a power supply. So that keeps prices down, which is a good thing objectively. But what I hate is if you plug this into the same computer that you're recording in, for example, it's good. The buzz is really terrible. It's really bad. And honestly, even if you have more than one USB instrument plugged into the same outlet, same problem. You're going to start getting buzz and getting a bunch of noise. And, honestly, that's getting harder to avoid when every synth and piece of gear lately that's coming out, especially in the smaller factor like these, are using USB as power. Like I have at least 3 or 4 pieces of gear that are using USB power now, and like having to find ways to not have those be on the same outlet area it's a struggle. So I hate that. That's not necessarily a Behringer thing. Again, that's an every company thing, it seems to me these days. I mean, I love Dreadbox, and Dreadbox is doing it too. So what are you going to do? But anyway, there's my general overview of the JT Mini. I'll probably do a sound demo later when I have it plugged into some of my other gear, just so that I can control it a little better, like from the Deluge. And then I'll really dive in and see what we can make this thing sound like by using some of my outboard effects and stuff like that as well. But I would say that my first impression is this is pretty awesome, Again, it's easy to knock Behringer, and I would knock Behringer for a lot of reasons. I think they're often kind of a shady business in some of their practices, but something like this, if it gets you into the synth world, and obviously I think it has a really nice sound to it. I can see how this will fit into my setup pretty easily. I mean, right off the bat, because it's 3-voice paraphonic, I don't think I have any poly analog synths right now. So that's really cool. We'll see how I can get this into a song. We'll see what we can do. This is what you get. This is what it is out of the box. This is what it can do. Like I said, it's nothing too fancy, but it is fully analog paraphonic synth for $100. You can't really beat that. If you found this helpful, if you found this useful, consider subscribing. It's a great help to the channel. I post lots of synth content as well as DAWless jams. My channel is mostly about using outboard gear and making songs. So I post a lot of songs as well as tutorials and overviews and stuff. Once again, Ryan from Oakland Ghosts, and I'll see you next time.